going on, everybody? Welcome to Beyond the Rack, brought to you by Darkside Strength, Strength Through Adaptability. Today we have a very special guest, someone who I've become close friends with and training partners with, a 4-time state champion in powerlifting, a 1-time national champion in powerlifting in 2006, strongman competitor, a police officer, Bret Oswald. Bret has competed from 2004 until 2019. In powerlifting with a raw total of 1675.5, raw reps total of 1846.3, and a single ply total of 1758. Bret has also helped coach Rivers football in 2016 with Coach Matt Prono. Thanks, Bret, for joining us today.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
So, where are you from? How did this all start? Let's go back to the very beginning.
Yeah. So I'm not from the Lakeshore area. I'm originally from central Wisconsin, Anago, and I was born there, grew up there, went to high school there, and even went to college in Stevens Point, so more of like the central Wisconsin area.
Okay. What was your first, touchings in sports? What was your first sport that you ever did?
I would say it was more, of like a traditional growing up. I played like Little League baseball, flag football, things like that in like grade school.
Yep.
And then my siblings and my dad were big into sports. My brother and sister played tennis all through high school. We're collegiate tennis players.
Oh, really?
Yep.
Where'd they go to school?
My sister went to Stevens Point as well. And then my brother kind of bounced around at colleges a little bit.
Yeah.
But he went to a junior college down in Illinois, and then eventually graduated from Loras College in Dubuque, Iowa.
Okay.
So kind of I grew up watching tennis. That was I think my dad thought I was always going to be a tennis player.
Yeah.
But obviously I'm not built to be a tennis player. So yeah, just growing up around sports, having exposure to different types of sports, and so that's kind of how it all started.
Okay. So you come from a very long family of collegiate athletes. Where did you start wrestling?
So let's back up again. So kind of like you grow up in Anago, and it's kind of like Two Rivers. There's a really long dynasty of football.
Yeah.
And Anago had state champion teams in the 80s, and football's kind of always been the sport. So growing up, you played flag football in grade school, and then when I got into middle school, the football program essentially went down, and they started up a tackle program, and then so in the middle school, we started it's kind of like the Junior Raiders you guys have here, and began playing tackle football. And I remember that was in middle school, and one of the coaches, Coach Thrash, he was a fireman in Anago, and really call him very intense coach for a middle school.
Yeah.
for coaching middle school, he was very intense. But he was also one of the assistant wrestling coaches. And one of the tackle football coaches was the head coach. And he's like, hey, you should come out and wrestle. And this was middle school. And I was always like, I don't know. And I remember my mom and I were at the Subway in Anago.
I know exactly where that is.
It was before it was out by the Walmart.
Yep.
There was a different Subway. And
there was one downtown.
Yes, maybe that's the one you're thinking of.
It was tiny.
Yes.
Tiny. Yep.
And we were eating in Subway, and Coach Thrash walks in, and he goes, well, Mrs. Oswald, your son's going to be wrestling this year. And I'm like, huh? And she's like, huh? He goes, yeah, practice starts next week. So that was kind of how I started wrestling. And I would say that's where this whole journey began in regards to athletics and weightlifting. So that's kind of the birth of it right there.
Okay. So what hobbies did you have outside of wrestling as a kid? Because every kid, goes fishing or throws dirt or throws rocks at people.
I lived
kept you busy outside of sports.
Legos.
Legos?
Legos.
You're a builder?
I was a builder, yeah.
Good.
I love Legos. I don't know, it's just kind of random.
Do you still play with Legos?
I do not.
No,
My
man.
nephews have all my Legos.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Yeah, so, I mean, I grew up out in the country, so,
Okay.
I wasn't in the city. I'd just go outside and kick a football around or throw baseball with friends. It was kind of centered, played a lot of video games as a typical kid.
We all did.
Yeah. But I remember growing up, and I don't know where they came from, but like those standard plates I have in my basement
Yeah.
with like the little skinny barbell.
Yeah.
So those used to be in the basement at my parents' house.
Okay.
And that's a York Barbell brand name, so like out of New York. And I recall we had an old bench press in the basement, and I remember my dad, I probably was in 5th or 6th grade, and my dad's like, hey, why don't you go downstairs and bench press a little bit?
So your dad got you started into strength training?
Yeah, I would say it was more of like not really intense, but I don't know where the weights came from. We had dumbbell handles in the basement, and it was more of like, hey, why don't you go downstairs and bench press?
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool. And I remember it was the bench press where the uprights came from like right here, like you see in the old powerlifting.
You have the close ones?
Yes.
You got to bring your hands out?
Yep. So
yeah.
the uprights came from like right here, and I remember it was kind of like when you rack it, it was kind of like wonky.
Yeah.
It wasn't the wide uprights. So that's what I remember. I remember my dad lifting off for me, and that's where I ever hit my first bench press, was in the basement of my parents' house at like 5th grade.
Was your dad like big into working out?
No.
No?
No. He would play tennis too with my siblings. He always encouraged us to play sports, to work out, to do things like that.
Yeah.
But I don't even know where they came from. I never asked him.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
I kind of had a similar story. My dad found, remember those plates that were plastic filled with sand that you could see?
Yeah, we had those too.
He found a set on the side of the road.
Yeah.
Because I didn't want to work out at the high school.
Yeah.
And brought it home. He's like, well, now you don't have an excuse. You can work out in the basement. My dad didn't work out. He didn't play any sports, but he pushed me to be in sports.
Yeah.
So
yeah, very, very similar. My dad just played tennis. I don't even know how he got into playing tennis.
I'm a terrible tennis player.
Pickleball's good though.
My son likes pickleball. We haven't played because we can't find the paddles, but
I got 4 paddles. We can go play sometime.
all right, well, maybe after this.
Yeah.
So obviously we talked, you went to college wrestling. Let's talk about high school wrestling. What was your first, in relationship to strength training, what was your first, like, outside of your basement correlation with strength training for high school wrestling? And like, did you instantly fall in love with it, or did you hate it?
I'm going to take a step back, actually.
Okay.
So the first strength training for, I would say, any sports came in middle school for us.
Oh, wow.
And the middle school in Anago was the old high school. So
okay.
if you've ever been there, I think the school itself was built in like the 50s. So it's very old, but then they did some renovations.
Yep.
And they converted, they converted a big room to a weight room. And that was my first taste of like actual weight training. So our football coaches in middle school and our wrestling coach were pretty much on the same page, like, hey, you guys got to lift weights.
Yeah.
So I recall like going in that weight room and working out with a math teacher, Mr. Harger. I'll never forget him. And he grew up in Wisconsin Rapids, came to Anago to be a teacher, and he just liked lifting weights.
Yeah.
So I remember after school, I would just go there and lift weights with Mr. Harger. And it was like me and him and like a couple other kids.
Yeah.
And the weight room itself was pretty cool. We had dumbbells, we had bench presses, we had squat racks. Remember, we had a glute ham raise that I would use.
Really? In middle school?
In middle school, yeah.
That's how it should be.
Yeah. Then I don't remember what we did. Maybe it was the BFS program. But I remember just I would stay after school when there was no sports, and I would just lift weights, and then my mom would pick me up. And I just remember going in there and just lifting weights. I don't know. It was a pretty cool scenario.
Did he have like a set schedule, or did you just come when you wanted to?
It was after school, so Mr. Harger would run the weight room, and I don't remember what time school went to, 3:30.
Yeah.
And the weight room would be open for, I remember I'd get there after school, the door would be closed and locked, and Mr. Harger would come in, key us all in, we go lift weights for an hour, and then it was kind of like just an after school thing that we could do.
Just for fun?
Yeah.
Fell in love with it then?
I loved it. I remember I just loved the way it made me feel.
Yeah.
Just gaining more like self-confidence because I
Yeah.
was a chubby kid. I remember stepping on the scale when I was in 6th grade and I was like 240 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So I was a husky boy at the J.C. Penney store. I always had to go to the husky rack. But then that was kind of like during the football season, after football. And then I remember our wrestling coach, Ron Pregler and Greg Pregler, the Pregler brothers. And if you're not from Anago, the names won't mean anything to you.
Yeah.
But they turned out to be, they were wrestling coaches, football coaches. I worked for them doing concrete construction.
Okay.
And I think, those people who are just absolute. I think Ron could have been in World's Strongest Man.
That big of a guy.
That big of a guy and that strong. But he would always, going back to the weight training, he himself and Greg, his younger brother, they would lift weights. They always told us how important lifting weights was. And then we lifted weights because that's what our coaches told us to do.
Right.
So it was just kind of like it was a culture, and all the coaches were on board. Lift weights, get stronger, and you're going to be a better athlete.
Yeah.
And that was pretty cool.
That's interesting that, like, they ran did they instruct you? Like, this is how you squat, stuff like that?
Yeah.
Good.
I think the Pregler, Ron and Greg were really big BFS guys.
Okay.
And Ron had the BFS book, he had the BFS cards, and he's like, you got to squat, you got to bench, you got to deadlift, you got to box squat, you got to power clean,
yeah.
You got to incline press, and that's what we did. And it got us stronger.
Yeah. So how did you, obviously wrestling season's pretty vigorous and you cut a lot of weight. I don't know, you didn't have to cut weight, so what'd you wrestle at?
I was a husky boy.
What'd you wrestle at in high school?
In high school, 275 pounds.
Okay.
Well, I did have to, when wrestling season started, I ate some, more salad and tuna.
Yeah.
If there's one thing that I could go back and do, it would probably be to improve my diet.
Okay.
Because I remember, being a high schooler, and after football practice, me and the big guys would go to the Chinese buffet in Anago.
Yep.
And just absolutely stuff our face.
We did the same thing here.
And, during football season, I was probably, 295, 300 pounds. And then for wrestling, it was a 275 weight limit.
Okay.
And so I remember, eating salads and tuna.
Yeah.
But I wrestled the heavyweight.
Now, because I don't know, because I can't look it up, how was your high school wrestling career? Let's elaborate on that.
I would say I was average.
Better than average if you made it to college.
Well, I made it to state my senior year.
Okay.
But then I got absolutely murdered at state. I was never like a really amazing athlete.
Yeah.
I was always bigger than people, stronger than people, because we lifted weights all the time. In high school, we had a powerlifting club.
Okay.
I remember Mr. Nelson. He was a social studies teacher, and he was a competitive bench presser.
Really?
Yep. And
Mr. Nelson. I'm gonna have to meet Mr. Nelson.
He's retired now, and these names, because it's a different area of the state.
Yeah.
Sorry if I go back and forth, but there's so much to talk about. I think it was my junior year or senior year. Somehow we got a powerlifting club put together.
Through the high school?
Through the high school, yeah. We got a powerlifting club, and I remember Mr. Nelson bringing issues of Powerlifting USA.
Oh yeah.
To the weight room after school, and he was showing us Ed Cohn and all these great powerlifters, and we would all train together. Me and 3 or 4 other guys, we would all train together, and Mr. Nelson wrote Titan Support Systems, and they sent us a box of free squat suits and free bench press shirts and knee wraps. So we were squatting with suits and benching with shirts in high school.
In high school.
In high school, yeah.
With a guy that knew how to do it.
With a guy that knew how to do it.
Because I put a deadlift suit on, but I've never benched in a shirt, and I've never squatted in a suit. It's got to be pretty technical.
Yeah, it was a trip. Like, we're like 17 years old, throwing on bench shirts.
Yeah.
And we had no idea what to do, but we trusted Mr. Nelson.
Yeah.
Because he was a big dude.
So what was your programming / training style like with Mr. Nelson? It's got to be different than a BFS.
What I remember was just a lot of 1-rep maxes.
Yeah.
And I think it was more like high school kids being high school kids, like very ego lifting.
Chest every day?
No, we squatted a lot.
Okay, we did not.
We deadlifted a lot. Mr. Nelson was, he would do bench press deadlift meets.
Okay.
He would never do full power meets. So he was big on, I remember he was big on deadlifting. Like deadlifting, let's go bench press and deadlift. Bench press and deadlift. And I remember just pulling a lot of 1-rep max deadlifts. I remember we would pull until the bar didn't come off the ground.
Yeah.
And then we would go do 1-rep max lat pull downs.
Just max effort training the whole time.
All the time. I remember me and my friend Zach, we would just keep loading plates. It was a BFS plate loaded lat pull down. Okay. And it's kind of like the one I have in my basement.
Yeah.
And we would just stack on plates and we do a rep. We'd stack on plates and do a rep. And we would just do 1-rep max everything.
So you couldn't anymore.
Yeah, until nothing moved.
What was your first, like, I'll use an example of kids that we have that come here, their first, 2 times training our style, which we'll get into later. But, yeah. And they get, super sore. You know what I mean? Like, your DOMS sets in.
Yeah.
What was your first reaction to that feeling? Because everyone gets sore playing sports, but sore in the weight room, that's a different feeling of soreness.
I remember, my chest being really sore for some reason. Because we would, and once again, it's a high schooler. You don't know what you're doing.
Yeah.
I remember we would 1-rep max a bench press, and then for some reason we do 100 reps with the barbell.
Oh, wow.
That was a thing.
You feel like your pec's going to tear off the next morning.
Yeah, and I just remember being sore. I remember feeling like, hey, we did something, but it never made me not want to come back. The soreness would dissipate, and we would go back and
go back and do it again.
Yeah.
Do you think there's a sense of accountability in yourself because you hit that we still hit it today? You get really sore, and you're like, I don't want to go tomorrow. You have to hit your four days in a week, we'll say.
Yeah.
Everyone has those days where they don't want to wake up and go. What made you want to get up and go?
Because it was fun.
Because it was fun?
I remember it was the people.
Friends?
We had friends. It was our own little, we're seniors in high school, but it was our own little crew in there.
Yeah.
And we were very accepting of other people, We weren't like those guys.
Yeah.
If other people want to come in and lift with us, we'd be like, hey, come on in. We brought in sophomores, freshmen, and we just kind of grew that culture.
Yeah.
And we grew our lifting group.
So would you take your knowledge and educate them, the new guys coming in or the freshmen?
I don't know if I had knowledge at that time.
Yeah.
I just remember we would just accept them into our group, and they would lift with us.
Okay.
And then Mr. Nelson was there to guide us.
Okay. So he was like Big Brother.
Yes. Well, he was the Godfather.
Yeah.
In the weight room.
Yeah.
But he would lift right with us.
Okay.
He was pulling deadlifts, and he was doing bench presses. I remember he had a set of arms on him, and he would do curls, and so he kind of led by example.
Yeah.
And then, we were there getting strong and holding each other accountable and just having fun. I remember he'd let us play the music we wanted to play, and we would turn it up, and it was just absolutely obscene.
Yeah.
But we loved it. We absolutely loved it.
We had a coach similar to that, Chris Fergie, and a very quiet guy. He played Division I football.
Yeah.
big dude, probably 275, something like that, 6'2".
Yeah.
But you watched him lift, knowing we're in high school, knowing he's 30 something.
Yeah.
And you'd see him bench 3 plates, and you're like, I'm going to do that one day.
Yeah.
Was it kind of like a motivation that way with Mr. Nelson?
Well, he was in his 50s.
Okay.
So he was, he's long retired by now.
Yeah.
I think it was just him imparting his knowledge to us and us taking it. And I think he just liked to see kids working hard.
Yeah.
And it was pretty clear now, like looking back, he enjoyed the weight room. That was like his thing. And I think just seeing us go in there and enjoy it, it was a very special time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good to have a mentor like that, if you can call him a mentor, I guess.
I do, yeah.
Because a lot of schools don't have that.
Yeah, and he was a social studies teacher. He wasn't.
He could connect to kids, it sounded like.
100%. Yeah, and just a great guy. Absolute great guy.
So you went to state. I'm going to fast forward to your state. You said senior year, right?
Yeah.
For wrestling?
Yeah.
Take me through that, because that's got to be pretty nerve-wracking going down to state from... And, Anago's not a massive city.
No, it's not. It's smaller than Two Rivers.
Yeah.
So that year, I tore my knee. I tore my meniscus. And...
Wrestling?
Yep, I had surgery.
Okay.
So I was out for, a month or so. And then I had surgery on Christmas Eve. I remember...
Ooh, that's a rough Christmas.
That was a shitty Christmas.
Yeah.
And rehab back, and with a minimal rehab time, I got through regionals, got through sectionals, and I qualified for state.
Okay.
But I got down to state, and people were stronger than me, more conditioned than I was, and I got absolutely manhandled.
At 275.
At 275, at heavyweight. Yeah.
That's a big weight to wrestle at.
Yeah.
Those are some massive guys.
Yes.
That's one sport I never did was wrestle, so I really don't know a lot about it besides the way you move. But
yeah,
it's how long are they got periods in wrestling? Is it 3 periods?
Yeah, 3. Well, I think high school was 2-2-2. College is 3-2-2.
Okay.
In the heavyweight category, it was anywhere from 216 to 275. So you get all shapes and sizes.
That's the buffer of the weight class?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, so you get guys who are 6'5", some are tall and lanky, some are this tall and 200. It's kind of like there's so many, you get to the smaller weight classes, typically people are built very similar.
Yeah.
But you get to the heavyweight category and there's just so many body shapes, body types. I remember guys were just super jacked up as high schoolers.
Yeah.
Some were really roly and poly. Some were tall and lanky. So there's a lot of different types of people to wrestle.
Yeah.
With.
Do you think, in a physical aspect, conditioning and strength needs to be balanced for wrestling, or do you think one's more important than the other?
Oh, they have to be balanced.
Okay.
Because it is, you have to be strong to a certain point, and you have to be conditioned to a certain point.
Yeah.
You got to hit that sweet spot. But I think that's, like any grappling sport or things like, you have to be strong. You have to be, it's just kind of like you got to be the total package.
Yeah. What was your conditioning like? We kind of heard about your weight room, but what was your conditioning like for wrestling?
I remember a lot of running.
Okay. Like miles?
A mixture.
Okay.
We would do sprints in the wrestling room, and then we would do a mixture of long runs. So our high school wrestling coach was a 2 or 3 time All-American at Stevens Point.
Okay.
So he was very squared away, and we did weight rooms. We went in the weight room during wrestling season. We would take our training partners and do firemen's carries, and we just run up and down the hallways with them on us. We would do buddy carries.
Yeah.
We would carry him like a baby. Just all different carries with your training partner.
Right. Because you got to be expert at moving people, essentially.
We would they would lay on the mat, and we would grab their hands, and we would drag them across the mat like dead drags.
Yeah.
Um, just all sorts of training.
And you were still powerlifting during this wrestling period?
No.
Okay.
They would, so powerlifting, between football and wrestling, I would powerlift in high school. And then wrestling came around, and I would do strictly wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the springtime, I played baseball my freshman and sophomore year of high school.
Okay.
Then my junior year, I went into track and field in the spring. And then my senior year, I kind of started that powerlifting. And that's where Mr. Nelson would have came in.
Okay.
So it was a lot of sports, a lot of different sports. Football, wrestling, track, baseball, and powerlifting in high school.
What were your events in track?
Just shot put and discus.
Okay.
Yeah, and I wasn't, it was more of a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
Because I had friends that went out for the sport, and I wasn't a good track and field athlete.
But you enjoyed it.
I loved it. And we got a chance to lift weights.
Yeah.
So it was a junior year, and I feel like everything kind of focused around weights in Anago.
Yeah.
So I remember we had a big pole building outside, and we went to go throw a shot one day, and we went to go grab the shot puts, and they had a squat rack and a bench press in the corner with an old barbell and weights, and we're like, hey, coach, can we lift weights outside? He's like, yeah, sure. So I remember myself and 2 or 3 of the other shot putters, we pulled the squat rack out, and we were doing squats outside, we were bench pressing outside, we were doing incline presses outside.
Yeah.
And that was part of our track program.
Wow.
It was great.
You don't see that a lot in track.
and our coach was like, nah, just go lift weights.
Yeah.
Yeah, we really didn't throw the shot put that much in practice. We just went and lifted weights.
And then came out on the day and just threw it.
Threw it during meet, yeah.
So take me to your first powerlifting meet.
Yeah, so I would say, I don't want to be unnecessarily like a quote-unquote powerlifting meet. I remember it being up in Hayward, Wisconsin.
Okay, that's up there.
Hayward is way up there. And I don't remember how I found out about it, but my friend Cody and I, and he powerlifted in high school at 181. Cody and I went up there, and it had to be senior year or junior, I can't remember. But it was a squat, bench press, and power clean meet.
Oh, wow.
It was a very weird meet, but Hayward had a very good powerlifting team.
Mm-hmm.
In the mid 2000s. So I remember kind of like a lot of powerlifting meets in the mid 2000s. They were held in gyms, like high school gyms. They never got held at like gyms like they do now, or like these big venues. So a lot of the meets that I went to were in high school gyms.
Like on basketball courts and stuff like that? Okay.
Yeah. So I remember that it was, I got to wear like normal shorts, and I got to wear a t-shirt, and I remember I squatted 500 pounds at that meet.
In your first powerlifting meet?
Yes.
You're strong.
Yeah. And I bench pressed 275.
Okay.
And I power clean 275.
Wow.
So a bodyweight bench press, a bodyweight power clean, and like a 1.5 bodyweight squat.
So what year of high school was that?
I think that was junior year.
Junior year?
Junior year, yeah.
So it's like 2004?
Yeah, 2004.
Ish, somewhere in there? Okay.
Yep.
So that, looking at your open powerlifting, your second meet was nationals. Unless open powerlifting's wrong.
I had a lot more meets than that.
Okay,
Yeah.
then it's not on there.
There are so many meets. Those are only USAPL meets and sanctioned meets.
Yeah.
So
you did a lot of like, we'll call them backyard meets, kind of.
Yeah. So that was my first meet, the one in Hayward. And then, other than the ones in open powerlifting, I've probably done, I would say, 15 other meets.
Not including the ones that we can see?
Not including those.
So you've done close to like 25, 30 meets total.
That would be fair to say.
Just in powerlifting, not even strongman.
Correct.
Wow.
Yeah, so the big ones, I remember the bench press deadlift meet in Adams Friendship.
Okay.
That used to be a big one.
It's done by the Dells, kind of.
I don't remember. I just remember driving there.
I think it's somewhere down there. But
there used to be a big meet in Independence, Wisconsin. That was Wisconsin's best bench press.
Okay.
There was a big meet down at the state fair. I used to do the bench press deadlift meet down there.
Oh, wow. I didn't know they did that down there.
Oh, it was cool. So you would be in a, I don't know how you describe it, but it was like in one of the big venues, and you would almost be like a sideshow. You remember like the animal cage?
Yeah.
It was very similar to that. You would be in like, I don't remember the building, but I just remember being up on a stage, bench pressing. No, you weren't up on a stage. The referee was up on a stage looking down at you, and you were on the floor level, and that's where the meet occurred. And I remember it was like taped off, and I just remember people walking by like you were an exhibit at the fair.
Yeah. Like you're a freak show.
It was so cool. And so that meet, for example, and I met some really, really great people there that I connected with in different meets later. So we had Independence, Adams, the State Fair meet. I did a meet in Stevens Point. I think it was a UPA meet.
Okay.
We held a strongman meet in Anago 2 different times. We called it the Big Grunt.
Who put that on?
Myself and my friend Scott.
You did the whole thing?
It was during Market Street Days in Anago.
Okay.
So we got it together. We competed in it, and we had the Prigler brothers judge it.
Okay.
So there's a video on YouTube of me deadlifting like a Ford Festiva.
Okay.
So there's just so much.
Yeah. Where'd you get the implements for that strongman meet specifically?
Yeah. So
I love strongman.
We had farmer walk handles, though actually the ones you have at the gym.
Yes.
Those were utilized for the farmer walk. We got those from Jake Wojciechowski.
Okay.
And those were in the basement at the Downtown Fitness in Anago.
Okay.
And they were in a back room.
So those are like 40 years old.
At least. At least 20 years old.
They're brutal.
So we got those from the Downtown Fitness, and Downtown Fitness is a whole other story altogether.
Yeah.
We did a beer keg press. So my buddy Ricky was a beer man for Miller in Anago.
Yeah.
And he got us some empty kegs. So we cut the top open, put sand in it, and it was a full keg like the one you have here.
Yeah.
And I remember we put sand in it, and we had to clean it up, and then we had to press it up.
Yeah.
Then we did the car deadlift. So I drove a Ford Festiva, which is essentially a Geo Metro.
Yeah.
So we went to there was a car shop in Anago that my friend Scott's father-in-law owned. And so he welded bars to the frame in the bottom.
Okay.
And we then he made a deadlift bar, like a square, and we would slide it into the car.
Yeah.
And then I could show you on YouTube later, and we would deadlift the back end of the car.
Okay.
And that was one of the events.
Bar in front handles or bar on the
Front
side?
handles.
Front handles. So like a normal deadlift?
Normal deadlift.
Okay.
And I think we had power stairs.
Okay. With a loading handle?
We got the power stairs from the Anago Concrete Company. So they brought a set of concrete stairs on a trailer.
Okay.
And then we had, like those milk jugs, like those old steel milk jugs from farms.
Yeah.
We took those and, because I work concrete, we loaded those with concrete. So we had...
That'd be heavy.
Those were crazy heavy. So my mom has pictures at home of this. And then, it was just, and then we would go to, there was so much. My friend Scott, his dad lived next to a granite quarry.
Okay.
So we go lift granite rocks.
All the time?
All the time.
I think you told me about that once.
Yeah. And my wife has pictures. We had granite rock. I had granite rocks in my parents' house, and we would just lift rocks and push cars and lift cars, and we made our own log for a log press.
Yeah.
There's just so much.
I think the power just went off. Oh, it's
Power
back.
went back on.
Good. Sorry about that. So, let's keep elaborating on the powerlifting before we get to your college.
Sorry, yeah.
What take me to like how you got to nationals. What brought you? Obviously, you have to qualify. So, what brought you to nationals? Team nationals.
Yeah. So, there's so much. So I didn't. Did your camera turn off?
No.
Oh. So that's kind of like a non-traditional story, I think you'd say too. So I wasn't going to go to Stevens Point originally. I actually went to Eau Claire, and I wasn't going to. I don't know how to like bring it back.
Yeah.
So playing high school, I'd say for me, I didn't plan to wrestle in college. I wanted to play football in college because football was like the thing.
That was the thing you loved?
That was the thing I loved. And I went to Eau Claire for mini camp. And
like before your freshman college year? Or?
Yep.
Okay.
So I don't know. It was I don't know how you did. You just said, "Hey, I'm going to go to Eau Claire." So I remember going to Eau Claire for mini camp, and I remember testing in the weight room,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember the squatting like 550 for 3 or something, and the coach is like, "Damn, dude, you've been doing some work in the." I'm like, "Yeah, coach. I've been lifting weights." But I remember just being like really homesick.
Yeah.
And I remember calling my mom, like crying. Like,
Yeah.
I want to come home. And because I just wasn't like, football in college, it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
There was like just a lot of people. I wasn't meshing with people very well. I didn't know a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I just got homesick. So I remember my mom coming over, picking me up, and I think it was 2 weeks before school started. And she's like, "Well, your sister went to Stevens Point. Do you want to try to go to Stevens Point?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" So I got into Stevens Point, and I got to school in the fall, and always had that love of lifting weights from high school. And then Stevens Point in 2005 it was an awesome weight room. Everything was steel. It was like a weight room out of Pumping Iron, like the Pumping Iron movie. And freshman year, I just began to lift weights. And that's all I did. I didn't start wrestling until my sophomore year of college.
Yeah.
So I just remember going in there and just doing what I knew was powerlifting. And the strength coach at Stevens Point, I kind of, I remember like seeing him, and he would always be like, "Hey man, what are you doing today?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm squatting." And they'd be like, "Hey, you want to play football here?" I'm like, "No, I'm good. I already tried that out." But he was actually the half brother of Chuck Vogopol.
Really?
Yes, Dave Tainer. And actually, in the West Side book, there's a picture of him in there.
Okay.
So I remember at that time, the football team at Stevens Point was a straight up West Side barbell program.
Good.
Yeah.
Was that your first introduction to that type of program?
Yes, I remember going in there, and I never knew who Chuck Vogopol was at that time. I didn't know what West Side barbell was at the time. I remember doing box squats with him at 6 a.m, and I remember it was like 12-inch box squats.
Yeah.
And I just remember lifting with him.
That's really low. 12-inch box squats is really low.
It was low. It was low.
I know, I did them yesterday.
Yeah. So I just kept on lifting weights.
Yeah.
And I said to myself, well, I want to do something that is competitive. So I remember seeing the state meet was in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And essentially I just signed up for it.
USAPL?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, USAPL, that was in 2006. And I went there and I won it. And that automatically qualified you for nationals.
Was that your first state meet?
Yes.
And you won your first state meet?
Yes.
And you've done it 4 times?
Yes. But keep in mind, the competition in that time, there wasn't a big pool of people.
Yeah.
over time, the pool of lifters has just expanded. And then with that, I qualified for nationals.
Okay.
And then nationals was held in Milwaukee, and I'm like, well, I'll just go to nationals.
Where in Milwaukee was that held?
It was at a hotel.
Okay.
That's the time when they held meets in like hotel ballrooms.
Like conference center type things?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And it was fun.
That's where my nationals was in Dallas in a giant hotel.
Yes. It was it was like I think it was by the airport, but I can't remember.
Okay.
I think it was at the same spot. So I remember going to the state fair or state meet there, and the nationals was there, and I won nationals too.
So your training for that nationals was a conjugate type style, West Side barbell style training mostly, or?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I just remember.
It was 18 years ago. So.
Yeah, I just remember just lifting heavy.
Yeah.
Like consistently lifting heavy.
And what weight class were you then? Still the 275?
No, that was super heavyweights.
308?
No, there was no 308s at the time.
Okay.
Super heavyweight. So I think I was like 295 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's big.
Yes. It was the buffet line.
You like the Chinese food, huh?
Well, at Stevens Point, it was all buffet.
Yeah.
You go to the food center.
Oh, a college buffet, yeah.
Yeah, so I remember just lifting weights and just eating. Eating.
So that was your freshman year of college, right?
Yes.
Because you didn't wrestle till your sophomore year.
Yes.
So how was going from high school, a year off from wrestling essentially, and then right into college wrestling? Because it's got to be a lot harder, more difficult, more
Crazy
vigorous.
harder. Yeah.
Was that a shock to you?
Yes.
Like with having that year off from wrestling?
I think looking back at it, I think it helped some. It got me. I remember just being really strong.
Yeah.
But then your other qualities went down.
Yeah.
Cardiovascular, muscular endurance. But being 19 years old, those things come back really fast.
Yeah.
I remember the big change was you're not wrestling high school boys anymore. You're wrestling essentially grown men.
Yeah.
And I remember the strength levels were a lot different. I remember the aggressiveness was a lot different. The intensity was a lot higher. The commitment was a lot higher. It was just overall like a more intense, physically demanding.
Was the camaraderie there?
Oh God, yeah.
Like better than football?
Yes.
You essentially had friends and got along with people and.
Yeah, and I'm more of a small group kind of guy.
Yeah.
Football. I remember going to minicamp in Eau Claire, and there was 100 people, 80 people.
Yeah.
I think, and then with the wrestling team, and it was kind of like it was similar to middle school. So I had friends from Anago that wrestled at Stevens Point, and it was more of a positive peer pressure thing.
Yeah.
And they're like, hey, what are you doing this coming winter? I'm like, well, I'm probably just going to lift weights. And they're like, you should come wrestle. And I remember I went to a party, and they're like, hey, come to a party with us. And it was a wrestling house.
Okay.
And I walked in, and nobody knew who I was. And everybody's staring at me, and my buddy Zach is like, hey, this is Bret. He's going to wrestle next year. And I'm like, what?
What?
So it was kind of like
No, I'm not.
It was kind of like the same thing at the subway with my mom.
Yeah. Just with a different guy.
Just with a different guy. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to wrestle next year. And they were like, okay, cool. And they just went back to doing their thing at the party. So I'm like, well, I can't go back on what I said.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how that started.
So then after that, did you have to go meet the coach, try out, or what? Because obviously you had a year off. Or did they know you from high school? Or know of you?
I knew the college coach because we would go over to Stevens Point for some clinics.
In high school?
In high school,
okay.
Yeah. And then my high school coach was an All-American at Stevens Point.
That's right. I did forget that.
It was a Division III program, so there wasn't tryouts, there wasn't scholarships.
Right.
There wasn't anything like that. We wrestled in the WIAC, so it was La Crosse, Eau Claire, Platteville, Whitewater, Stevens Point, Oshkosh. So the competition was really good. We wrestled Lakeland University.
Yep.
So it was the pool of people, or the pool of athletes in the WIAC. It's really good.
Is that the first place you met Mike Derone? Or is that later?
I remember meeting him. The first time I've ever met him, I believe it was at clinic when I was in high school in Stevens Point.
Okay.
And I think at the time, don't quote me, I think it was him, because all those...
He did say he knows who you are when I talked to him.
Then I remember he was coaching at UW Oshkosh when I was there at Stevens Point. And then I'm not sure if he was the head coach at Lakeland at that time.
I'm not sure. I've only known him for maybe a year, but...
Yeah. Oshkosh for sure.
It's just ironic how now you guys both live in Two Rivers.
I know. It's 8 degrees of separation, whatever you call it. Yeah, so that's kind of how I got into collegiate wrestling.
Okay. And you wrestled sophomore, junior, senior year at Point?
It took me 5 years to get through school.
Okay.
And I took that 5th year because I had 4 years of eligibility.
Yeah.
And I knew with being in that small group, in that intense group, I knew I had to finish out 4 years.
Yeah.
And so I wrestled for 4 years.
Okay.
Yep.
So that would bring you to 2009?
Yes, I graduated from Stevens Point in 2010.
And were you still powerlifting in college?
Oh yeah.
And strongman?
Oh yeah.
You just didn't stop?
No.
It's constant going. How much coffee did you have?
At that time, it was pre-workout.
Okay.
No, I never quote unquote, like powerlifted through wrestling season.
Yeah.
But I remember once again it was that culture.
Yeah.
Everybody wanted to be strong, and you didn't want to let your team down. And I wrestled heavyweight, so you had to keep that certain level of strength.
Yeah.
And I think having that love of lifting and the passion of lifting, I just love lifting weights. I remember on the weekends when we didn't have tournaments, I would go in the weight room and lift weights.
But you still do that, because just in me knowing you the last 6 years or so, it'll be, hey, I have a week off. When do you want to train? Yeah. Which is, most people don't do that. They're like, hey, I got vacation for a week. No. You want to lift in the morning and then go get breakfast? It's like, yeah. You got bit by the iron bug a long time ago.
I love it. I love it.
We kind of touched on it with Mr. Nelson and stuff.
Yeah.
But everyone that's played athletics or powerlifting or has had a coach has had an influential coach, someone they continuously always think about, or their teachings. Like for me, it was Dan Hartwig. Yeah. He was my first competitive, hard-nosed football coach in 8th grade. Yeah. And Randy Fredrickson coached me through so much basketball. Who were some of yours?
There were so many. I mean,
or training partners in your early life. We'll get to your present day life in a little bit, but
coaches. I would say Ron and Greg Pregler, the middle school wrestling coaches, and I went later and worked concrete construction for them. Those were the guys who really got me into the wrestling and lifting. Mm-hmm. My dad, he's the one who got me bench pressing in the basement. Yeah.
He still lifts with you. He was just here the other weekend.
Yeah, he goes to there's a gym in Anago that's connected to the hospital, and he goes and lifts weights there. And he's close to 80 years old.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
He's still active.
Yeah, walks, lifts weights, cuts the lawn at home.
Yeah.
Mr. Nelson.
Mr. Nelson.
He's the first one. I remember he got those. I'll never forget. He was our social studies, psychology teacher, and then I remember at the end of class, when we had, when his lesson plan was done, he would slip us the issues of Powerlifting USA.
In class?
The lesson was done for the day, and he goes, hey, I got the new issue of Powerlifting USA. We're like, hey, thanks, Mr. Nelson. Yeah. So we're sitting there, looking through the articles and the results from the meet. Yeah. So he was one. The high school wrestling coach, Tom Wykes.
Okay.
He was the one who really instilled hard work. Mr. Kohler, he was a high school football coach who was our offensive line coach.
Yeah.
He just instilled hard work. Coach Grundy, he was our head football coach junior and senior year.
That sounds familiar.
Kevin Grundy, he was from Wausau. Then he came to Antigo for a few years.
Okay.
Johnny Johnson, our head coach in college, Jan White, the head assistant coach in college wrestling. There's just so many people and training partners. It was really cool. And the weight room in Stevens Point was. Do we have enough time?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. The weight room in Stevens Point. Once again, it was like a culture.
Yeah.
It was like the place to be. And I had so many training partners there who were a mixture of all sorts of athletes. I trained with hammer throwers, Mike Schlichting, he's from Hortonville. Ryan Widow, he's from the Milwaukee area, who's a rugby player.
Okay.
Chris Magruder, I wrestled with him over at Stevens Point. Chris Carl, I wrestled with him. Zach Eisen and the Eisen brothers. So it was almost like you had like a stable. Or Derek Martini, he was a bodybuilder from Rice Lake.
Okay.
The whitest, he was about this tall, and he was literally as wide as he was tall.
Yeah.
But you almost had like a Zach Zebro from Mosinee, like, I don't know. So you just had like no matter whenever you went in there, if you were training bench press that day, or squats, or deadlifts, and you were in there alone, you could go up to the guy and be like, hey, let's go train squats. And they'd be like, okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Or I used to live in a house with 6 other guys. And I'd be like, hey, who wants to go lift weights today?
Yeah.
And one of them would be like, all right, let's go. So I don't want to say there's an influential training partner or an influential coach, because it just seemed like I was surrounded by him.
Yeah.
It was the coolest thing ever.
But you chose, at least from an outside looking in, you chose your friends based off of what you liked to do.
Similar interests.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
you weren't hanging out with someone that's chiefing heaters at the tavern all night long.
No.
You're hanging out with like-minded individuals.
Absolutely. I mean,
which probably drove you to be better.
Oh, yes. We had, I think that's a really great way to put it. Like, you go out in college and you have fun.
Everyone does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it was always going out with those people.
Right.
The people who I were on the wrestling team with and lifted weights with and lived with and trained with.
Yeah.
But we all had very, very like-minded. We always wanted to get in the weight room, lift weights, wrestle.
Did you hold each other accountable? Like, hey, I went out too long this one night, and would you ever, like, make sure that they would show up? Stuff like that?
Oh, yeah. I remember many times where, people were out a little too late.
Yeah.
And they told me they were going to lift weights the next morning. And I would go in their room, I'd turn the light on, like, it's time, let's go.
Yeah.
And they're like,
sweat it out.
Okay. It was a really special time.
Yeah.
It was cool. Just the culture and the people and the camaraderie and the shit talking and, like I always run my mouth in here.
Yeah.
That's nothing.
Yeah.
You should have been at the Stevens Point weight room. It was constant.
That's good. That's like,
yeah.
It kind of breaks the barriers between people. Like,
oh yeah.
Learn how to joke around and not really give a fuck.
Yeah.
Just have fun.
Yeah, it was so cool.
Yeah.
It was such a special time.
So that brought you to like 2000. You graduated 9, 10-ish.
Yeah.
So what brought you to Two Rivers, powerlifting, the Bret that we know today? I mean, granted, this is 2024, but...
So I went to school in Stevens Point for health promotion and wellness, minored in strength and conditioning.
Okay.
So I took all the strength and conditioning courses, human biology, human physiology, sports nutrition, sports psychology, the whole nine.
So a lot of those books you probably read.
Some of them you bought from me.
Yeah, that is true.
So, my career goal at that time, I wanted to be a high-level strength coach.
Yep.
I met my wife. She was my girlfriend at the time.
In college?
In college.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Stephanie's from the Chicago area.
Okay.
And it was by happenstance, too. I had a friend who went to Stevens Point that I went to high school with, and somehow she got to know Stephanie, and then I saw... Her name's Jolene, and I saw Jolene with Stephanie one day, and I'm like, "Hey, who's that blonde that you got there with you?"
Yeah. Who's that?
Who's that blonde? And she's like, "Oh, that's Stephanie, but she has a boyfriend." I'm like, "Okay."
Not anymore.
And that's how I met Stephanie.
Yeah.
And then obviously we fell in love, and to be a high level strength coach, you have to go get a master's and doctorate and things like that. And she established herself in Stevens Point, working for Portage County, and I'm like, well, I don't want to stop her from that opportunity.
A little closer.
And then we just kept in contact and kept in touch, and then started a relationship, and then eventually, what got me to here is I went back to school to be a policeman.
So you guys lived in Portage County?
We lived in Stevens Point, yeah.
Is that Portage County? I have no idea.
Yes,
so.
Stevens Point is Portage County.
Okay.
Or Portage County, Stevens Point is in Portage County.
Okay.
I don't know how you...
Now I'm tracking.
Yeah. And then, after I was doing a couple of jobs on the, work in sales, and I worked at a group home for a while, and, still thinking about the strength and conditioning because I was personal training at a local gym, and going back to that, hey, I'm going to have to get my master's, and then ultimately, if I want to keep going, I have to get my doctorate.
Yeah, to go super high, you got to have that.
I don't know if I'm smart enough to get my doctorate.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
Yeah, and I think I was done with school, and then eventually, I always thought about going into law enforcement, and
that was always like in the back of your mind.
Yeah, for some reason, I just never did it, and I remember I came home. I worked sales for like a year and a half.
What were you selling?
Computer software.
Nice.
Yeah, accelerated reader.
I remember that.
So it was at a company named Renaissance Learning in Wisconsin Rapids. So I remember I drive from I worked a 10 to 6 shift at Renaissance Learning because I had the California district.
Yeah.
And there's a whole other story about lifting weights too in Wisconsin Rapids. I mean,
jeez, you just never stop.
Never stop. So yeah, we could have another podcast altogether.
We probably will.
Yeah. And so then I disliked my job, and I remember coming home one night and talking with Stephanie in depth, and somehow conversation got brought up about going back to school for law enforcement, and she's like, just do it. You're not happy. And I did it, and I went to a police academy over in the Wisconsin Rapids area, graduated, and then like everybody in law enforcement at the time, I sent out probably 50, 60 applications.
Wow.
And eventually got hired over here in Manitowoc, and I've been here for 12 years now.
12 years?
Yeah.
So did you move, did she move right with you?
Yeah, well, eventually. So, you get hired somewhere else, and I got hired, and it's kind of funny now, but I got hired, and I think at the time, Stephanie was kind of like, so what's going to happen to us? And I'm like, well, you're coming with me, right?
Yeah.
And she's like, oh, yeah.
See, in girls' minds, they're like, they need to ask, and you're like, no, they're just coming. Like, you assume it, right?
Yeah, you're coming with me, right?
Yeah.
And so I moved over here and I lived over here alone for probably 3 to 4 months before I got hired in July of 2012.
Okay.
And Stephanie didn't move over till, I want to say like October or November. So I lived over here alone for a little bit amount of time. And then eventually Stephanie moved over. But then during that time, it was really cool too. Like I joined the YMCA in Manitowoc. I think I joined Planet Fitness too. So
I'm sorry.
it's what I knew at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great machines though.
They are.
I will give them that.
Those Lifetime machines are good.
If I could put like a full weight room with their machine selection,
Yeah.
I love it. So that's kind of how I got over here. So a transplant.
A transplant.
A
Yeah.
transplant.
So the why.
Yeah.
And because we had Lewis on here, who can't be here today because he's sick. His first interaction in his head when we asked what got you into powerlifting, he said, I met Bret in the squat rack. Take us through your perspective of that.
I would say that's an accurate representation.
Yeah. Start from the beginning of that, because you guys competed for 6 years together, roughly?
I don't know the amount of time, but it was a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. I met him at the Y. I think at the time I was squatting, and it was the old Y.
Before the remodel.
Before the remodel.
Yeah.
So it was steel plates.
Yeah. That looked like a pumping iron gym.
I can't remember the T-bar row, the chest supported.
Yep.
The chest supported row. Old school cable crossover. I can't remember what the squat racks looked like. They didn't have the power clean platforms.
No, I remember it just being like it was really green and yellow paint.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
And I think at that time the YMCA, I was working. I don't know if I was working nights. And I remember I went in there one time, and he worked at the nuclear plant at the time,
Mm-hmm.
so he knew Big Joe.
Grunwald?
Big Joe,
Yep.
He knew Big Joe, who was also a super strong dude, strong man, powerlifting.
Yeah. So what connected you to Joe
I think it was
before
just,
Lewis?
Yeah, I think it was just the like-minded love of lifting heavy weights.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was it. You see in a typical gym, you don't see people, squatting 600 pounds and deadlifting close to 700 pounds. And then you see other people do that, because Joe, I think, he was probably benching, 4.5 at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, hey, who's this guy?
Yeah.
So then, I think just doing that type of lifting, you automatically kind of like, it's like two magnets coming together.
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? So then I met Louis through Joe.
But you didn't know Joe before that competing? Because I know he competed in strongman and stuff like that.
No, I didn't know Joe. So when I competed in strongman, it was over. A lot of them were in like I did a couple meets over in Wausau. I did a lot of them over in New London with Tony Scrivens.
Yep.
The Northeast Wisconsin Strongman Association. With the Bergmans were always the judges.
Yep.
The guy Jason Bergman, the guy who's the world's strongest man.
Yep.
He was one of our judges.
Oh wow.
So that was crazy in itself. But I met Louis through Joe, and then I recall I didn't know Louis very well. I just knew of him.
Yeah.
And it was at the YMCA, and what I remember is there wasn't a lot of people in there. I was squatting, and then he walked in, and I think he got on a rack, and then I'm like, hey, you just want to squat together? And he's like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And then I think we just squatted.
And just hit it off. It's like a couple.
Yeah. So that's how I met Louis, and I he was a very like-minded individual.
Yeah.
Loved lifting weights. Loved pushing it hard. Loved just being in the weight room, and we just kept on lifting weights. And I'm like, hey, I'm going to go do a meet. You want to go do a meet? Yeah, sure.
So you talked him into his first meet.
You know, I don't know about the words talk in.
'Cause he was going to be a bodybuilder. That was his goal.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
You'd have to look back at what his exact words were, but
Yeah.
he trained with this old guy at the Y. He didn't even know his name, but he
really?
would give him nutrition advice. He was a bodybuilder. Louis said he had to be in his 60s. And then he realized with kids and meeting Lisa and all that stuff, he's like, I don't want to be a bodybuilder.
Yeah.
So the fact that you got him to do a powerlifting meet and change his mindset from I want to look pretty to I want to be brutally strong is kind of interesting.
Yeah, yeah. And
It's hard to change mindsets of people.
Yes, you're always seems like people are, I don't say stuck in certain ways.
Yeah.
But they have, like you said, a certain way of how I think things are going to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's how I met Louis, and I've known him. You know, that had to be 2013.
Yeah.
Maybe 2014.
Something before my time.
Approximately.
Yeah.
And then we just kept on lifting weights together.
And it just never stopped.
It just never stopped. And we lifted weights, you know, like, I don't know, a couple weeks ago.
Because you guys have transitioned from the Y to home gym owners to going to, was it the Body Shop? Or you guys went
the
to
Body Shop in Sheboygan.
You guys went to like Ford's Gym in Madison once, I think.
Yeah, Animal House.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm sure.
You do?
I went there with Joe Grunwald. That's when I got this shirt.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it was just we kept on working out together and developing and competed, and I never thought I would compete again after college, honestly.
Because of work and family and stuff like that?
Yeah, because of it just... Yeah, but after college, I did compete at a UPA meet in Dubuque, Iowa.
Is that with the Lily Bridges?
That was a whole other story altogether.
Yeah.
You know, there's just been so many meets, but that's kind of how I got here, and then moved to Two Rivers.
Yeah.
And started a family, and Dark Side Strength opened, and then I'm like, hey, it's a pretty cool gym.
Speaking of family, how do you balance like work? Because obviously, at the time you were probably on nights.
Yeah.
Now you're probably on days. But how do you balance work, training, family life, being a husband? You have 2 kids.
Yep.
And being like someone's friend, like Louis or mine. It's like, how do you balance all that? Because it's a lot, especially if you're training an hour and a half, 2 hours a day, 3 days, 4 days a week.
Yeah. I would say don't try to squeeze so much into a short amount of time.
Yeah.
You know, like with training, there were times when if I didn't lift weights 5 to 6 times a week, I was like, oh man, this is awful.
Yeah.
I had to be in there, you know, especially when I was over at Stevens Point, 7 days a week. I was doing something different every day. You know, my wife knew me at that time when I was kind of in the thick of it, competing and trying to get as big as possible. Every day I was in a gym over, whether it be in Plover or Wisconsin Rapids or lifting over in Iowa with a guy. But I would say the balance of it is realizing that you don't have to cram so much into a short amount of time.
Yeah.
I would say first and foremost, you have to make time for your family.
Yeah.
Because they're always going to be there.
Yeah.
I don't say that you're stuck with them, but you know they're always going to be there.
Yeah.
And I think just knowing when to do things and when not to do things. You know?
Yeah. Did you ever dial your training back since getting married, having kids, like from 7 days a week to, for me, for example, I do only 4. I won't.
Yeah.
Unless I miss one during the week, I won't lift on the weekend.
Yeah.
But I won't do more than 4 a week.
Yeah. I would say if I can get in the gym and lift weights, you know, 3 days a week, that's a good week.
Yeah.
You know, some weeks it's 2 days a week, and then I have to kind of change how I'm training. You know, like this morning I was in here, and it was kind of a full body lift because, you know, I only got in the gym twice.
Today was your second time?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, for like lifting weights.
Yeah.
You know, I still like doing cardiovascular work, walking. Yesterday I went to the Y. They have a couple of new cardio equipment. They have a ski erg and a Soul assault treadmill,
Yep.
an upper body bike. I did those yesterday. So I would say, lifting weights 3 days a week. That's a good week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's plenty. Like,
Yeah.
especially for younger kids. We'll get into that in a second.
Yeah.
They can't handle much more than that if it's vigorous enough.
Yeah.
So you've had all these years of powerlifting and strongman and college sports and high school sports.
Yeah.
How have your training styles evolved? Because we hear things, like you and I will talk, we'll hear like Shico, conjugate, linear periodization,
Yeah.
Renaissance periodization. What benefited you in athletics, powerlifting, and strongman the most, in your opinion?
I think the common factor is no matter what you're doing, you are just working hard.
Yeah, so work ethic.
Yes. I got strong in middle school. I got strong in high school. I got strong in college.
Yeah.
And I think...
And you got strong after college.
And I got strong after college.
Yeah.
I think just no matter what you're doing, be smart about it.
Yeah.
There's all different training programs, but I think it just comes back down to intensity.
Yeah.
It just comes to intensity.
How much you can push yourself
Yeah.
while still recovering the next day.
Yeah. Yeah. And
That's interesting.
Yeah. I mean...
Are you an auto-regulate type of person? Like, say, for example, it's a bench day or a press day. Do you just come in and say, okay, we're pressing heavy today for doubles and see what it is and not rely on a percentage?
Those days are over.
Yeah. But when it was... if I phrase that right.
Yeah. Like when I was competing?
Yeah. Or did you stick to... I'm a numbers guy, so if I know I have to hit a certain percentage, I would hit it. No?
I would just go.
Okay.
I would just go for... Man, there's so much.
Yeah.
You had like the BFS in high school.
Yeah.
And you always had to hit like certain numbers. But after high school, I can't remember what I did for like prep for the state meet or prep for the national meet, my first one. I don't remember. I just remember going like really heavy.
Yeah.
And I remember having that squat suit, and I remember breaking blood vessels in my chest and neck.
Yep.
And I remember...
Because it's so tight?
Yeah. I just remember like breaking, and I hit like red dots.
Maybe like bruising almost?
Uh...
My eyes did that once. It bruised.
It was pretty constant. Like, it was like somebody stuck you with like pins everywhere.
Yeah.
And like I remember in I just remember going heavy. That's all I remember. I remember hitting with that hammer thrower at Stevens Point. I remember hitting an 800-pound box squat with a suit on.
Yeah.
And I remember like I was broken blood vessels from my chest all the way up to my head.
Yeah. With the heavy squat.
I just remember going heavy.
Yeah.
That was like the common theme.
That's a good theme to go by.
Yeah, just heavy. When it really transferred to sports for me, though, I remember it was between my second and third year of wrestling, and we went. It was more of a holistic approach.
Yeah.
I remember we would bicycle to the gym.
Okay.
And we lived at a gym on the south side of Stevens Point, Elite Fitness.
Okay.
And Todd Deppner owned it. Todd Deppner was a competitive bench presser.
Yeah. I recognize the name.
It's all gone. I mean, the gym's gone now.
Yeah.
But I remember we would bicycle there, and that's when I was more introduced to the conjugate style of programming. And I lifted with a guy named Chris Magruder, who I wrestled with. And I remember at 165 pounds, he deadlifted 450.
Wow.
He was just insane. He was a gymnast in high school.
Yeah.
Wrestled insanely strong. But man, I don't know where I'm going with this. That's when like you talked about transfer to sport.
Yeah.
That summer was the summer of, if you could say, like, I really started looking at the West Side Barbell stuff. I remember I had the Mike Ruggiero training program. Mike Ruggiero was an enormous lifter at Westside, and I just remember doing, like knee-high pin pulls at that Elite Fitness with, at that time, 750 pounds.
Yeah.
I remember doing partial squats. I remember doing a lot of bands. I got a pair of bands, and we would go until we couldn't budge that bar off the pins. And I remember doing a lot of accessory work. I remember pulling sleds out at the parking lot at Stevens Point. I remember pushing cars. So having like a whole, what do you use?
Like a toolbox?
Yes, having like a lot of different training modalities.
Yeah. And
I remember coming back to wrestling that year after that whole summer of training. And I remember that's the year too where like I kind of learned a little more about nutrition in school, and I kept my nutrition a little cleaner. And I remember I came back to school, and somebody's like, "Jesus, what happened to you this summer?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" They're like, "Yeah, you look like jacked up now." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool."
Thanks, man.
And then I remember going into wrestling season, and like I just remember we were training and we were wrestling, and I remember you do like a half Nelson, you turn somebody over to a pin.
Yeah.
And I just remember getting that half Nelson in, and a person I had a hard time turning last year. I remember going and just turning them, and they're like, "What'd you do this summer?" "Oh, no, I just lifted weights." But that's where it was kind of like an aha moment.
Yeah.
Where you just can't train for like powerlifting.
Right.
You can't do just bench squat dead.
You can't. It'll beat you up.
Yeah. That's where it was kind of like the aha moment where you're like, okay, the bicycling, the lifting brutally heavy weights, the circuits in the weight room, pulling sleds. I remember I swam a lot that summer at the YMCA.
Yeah. So
it was just like a holistic approach. And that's what really transferred over to sport for me.
So essentially work capacity. Just being the ability to do many different things for long periods of time.
Training all these different types of strengths and energy systems, and kind of making it into like, the total package.
Yeah. So you, in your intro, you helped Prano with Lewis coach strength and conditioning for the high school for a little while.
That was just a summer.
Yeah.
Because my first daughter was born, so I had off for the summer.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think Matt was coaching at the time, and I knew Matt through work. And he's like, "Hey, do you want to come help me coach the kids?" I'm like, "Yeah, sure."
Yeah.
Like an hour or two a day. I just went in there and volunteered, and I helped those guys.
Did you kind of do what Mr. Nelson did to you, to them, like instruct and teach and mentor?
I remember.
A lot of kids don't know how to squat without any weight.
Yeah.
Or stuff like that.
I remember we would work out before the kids came in, and our workout was kind of ending when they were all coming in.
Yeah.
And I remember them coming in and like going, like, "Oh, what are you guys doing?"
Yeah.
Like, "Oh, we're just lifting." And I think that was kind of like the Mr. Nelson type deal. Like,
yeah.
I know you can do this, so I maybe put a little more trust in you to coach me.
Yeah.
So yeah, we would lift and we would instruct them on how to do things, and it was a really good group of high schoolers that we had too.
Yeah. Well, they went level 4 playoffs that year, so
they were really enthusiastic and a really good group to be around. Loved working hard, loved doing all these different things. So I think once again the people really made it special.
Well, I'll share this with you. One of them came here for Christmas. His name's Tristan Dupree. I don't know if you remember who that is.
I do.
He is now a strength coach at Tennessee State.
Nice.
Under, I might mess this up, Eddie George?
Okay.
I think it's Eddie George.
Okay.
I think he's the head coach.
Cool.
Someone like that.
Cool.
But he's their strength coach there, just got a job, just moved there.
Nice.
And when they came for Christmas, all of them were like, "Can you get Matt and Brett here?" And I'm like, well, I'll try.
Oh, that's cool.
It was like 8 in the morning, and you guys were all at work, so.
Oh, that's cool.
But you did teach them something if that kid got a job in it. And he's been a competitive powerlifter for the last 5 years.
Yeah,
So
I remember that was a good group of guys.
lastly, last question. What does your training style look now post powerlifting strongman career? Because you're still in here.
Oh, yeah. Training style. I would say the best way to sum it up is just because I can do things doesn't mean I should do things.
Mm-hmm.
Like hitting 1 rep max squats.
Yeah.
I would say my training style is more, I try to get a lot of work done in a short amount of time.
So you move quick.
Yes. Minimal rest periods. Well, try a lot of, like, because in the morning I get here at 5 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
and I know my daughter's getting up at about 6, so I try to squeeze in as much work as I can within an hour.
Yeah.
Be it working sleds out in the parking lot, doing an upper body day, lower body day. So that's kind of like, but still like lifting weights.
Right.
Like this morning I came in and working incline dumbbells, supersetted with chest supported rows, then superset that with lunges, with sled pushes. So I just try to get as much as I can done in an hour.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is it safe to say you'll never stop working out in some form
Never.
till it kills you?
Hopefully that doesn't.
Hopefully that doesn't happen.
No, I think too. Once again, I go back to it's something that I love and enjoy, and being exposed to it at such a young age, and it's something that I always loved. No matter where I was at, no matter what I was doing. It doesn't matter if I was in a sport, not in a sport, where I lived, what kind of job I had. It was always, I would find a gym. If we're on vacation, I'll find a gym. I'll take my push-up handles and my gymnastics rings with me.
Yeah.
And I'll work out. Or I'll go hiking somewhere, It was just, it's been like a lifelong passion.
Yeah.
I love it.
Good.
Yeah.
So do I.
Yeah.
One day I'll have a time where the heavy doubles and triples is going to stop, and it's going to be sad, but that doesn't mean you have to stop moving.
No, I'm closer, I'm a couple of years away from 40.
Yeah.
And, and I'm young in the grand scheme of things.
In terms of life, yeah.
Yeah. But, like Indiana Jones says, it's not the years, it's the mileage.
Yeah.
Literally powerlifting since 2004.
Yeah. Till 19-ish.
Yeah.
That's a long time.
And that's pretty, 15 years straight.
At a high level with trips to nationals and
Raw nationals and Equip nationals and strongman, and I did Illinois strongest man.
Yeah.
It's a lot. And it's a lot to, I'm the type of person, if I'm competing in something, I'm in it to win it.
Yeah.
I will do whatever it takes to win.
Yeah.
And I think you probably saw that, it talked about that with Louis,
I saw it with the both of you for when I made that goal to go to nationals.
Yeah.
We went to Louis' house.
Yeah.
And it was just me lift that day. You were teaching me how to use a deadlift suit and stuff like that. And it was, this is your day to lift, we'll load your weights.
Yeah.
But the intensity, and because I'm super competitive, Louis is super, so are you.
Yeah.
But to drive someone else's competitive to a higher level, that's what you guys did great for me in multiple meets that I've done.
Yeah.
But I remember going down to nationals in Dallas and I missed weight, and I texted you and I'm like, I'm overweight by 2 pounds. And you're like, this is what you got to do. And then Louis called me. He's like, relax. This is what you got to do.
Yeah.
Because I went by myself with my dad. Like, my dad doesn't know how to cut weight.
Yeah.
I had to cut that in 25 minutes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But having people in your corner, whether it's you competing and us in your corner, or vice versa, I think that's super important. Whether they're physically present there with you or a phone call away, you always have someone to lean on, I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess thanks for that for me.
You're welcome.
But we've all had multiple people. You've had more than I have in your life.
Oh, there's so
that
many.
You can
countless.
rely on. that Jamie's weird. Some guy that I met randomly walked into my gym and said, "You know Bret Oswald?" Well, first he said, Daddy Daycare Barbell. And I was like, yeah, Brett and Louie. He's like, I forgot their names, but yes, them.
Yeah, I met him at a state meet.
Yeah.
I don't know when.
He's like 52, 53, something like that. He's older.
It's a pretty small circle.
Yeah.
You know, once you get to the meets and you keep seeing the same faces and you go to these gyms and you're like, oh, hey, I recognize it. Even when we went down to, Louie and I went down to that gym in Madison to lift weights, I saw faces there that they were at the state meet.
Yeah.
Like, oh, hey, how you doing, you know?
I went to Sheboygan. They had some heavier stones a couple years ago, and I just wanted to try them.
Yeah.
So Nathan Zastro invited me down, and I used to watch the Shaw Classic, Brian Shaw, and stuff like that. Found out Chris Aylitz, he's like 39, was on Brian Shaw's strength team, lived out in Colorado with him.
That's cool.
Lives in Sheboygan. Went to Holman High School, powerlifted for Holman.
Holman had a good team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now he works at Three Sheeps Brewery, and I went down there, and
wow.
Now it's just, hey, come lift whenever you want. Some now and then I'll pop in, but
that's cool.
It is a small world. Like, just because someone's a pro, saying strongman, doesn't mean you're not going to meet them the next day. It's not like the NFL.
No, yeah. Typically, you know,
this guy lifts big rocks.
They have normal jobs.
Yeah, well, unless you're like the world's strongest man. Yeah, they have normal jobs.
Yeah, they're all normal people.
Like Adam Dirks is, I don't know if you know who that is.
Yeah.
But he's a coach for professional strongman competitors. He's from like Appleton.
Yeah.
Or Clintonville, something. I might mess up the town.
Well, Clintonville had a big. That's where.
Kevin Prothero. I don't know if you know who that is. He's a pro strongman. He lives in Clintonville.
Yeah, Clintonville. That's where like the Bergmans were from.
Yeah.
There was a ton of really good strongmen out of Clintonville.
Yeah.
That's where they'd all come over to compete at Big Tony's.
Yeah.
In New London, and they all trained together at Big Tony's place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like Wisconsin, I think, is underlooked at as a strength state.
And Ohio's really big.
Iowa.
Yep.
Illinois, yeah, but like the Midwest is just brutally strong.
Yes.
There's a ton of people here.
Yes.
Like I took Tom View to his first novice meet. 3 events and nothing super heavy, but you're seeing guys in their first event pulling like 650 on deadlifts, and it's like, what?
Yeah.
You don't see that often.
Yeah. But I think, you know, you come from certain gyms, like that was just the norm.
Yeah.
You know, that downtown fitness in Anago, we lifted in a basement. Yeah. And you see people bench pressing, you know, 350, 400 pounds and squatting 500 and deadlifting 600 pounds. That was the norm. Yeah.
Anything less than that is just weak.
Yeah, no, like, you know, that was, people are like, oh, I, you know, did this, that, or the other thing. And I'm like, okay. Yeah. And it's just normal to see.
Like in my mind, and maybe you're the same way, PRs or whatever they are, yeah, cool, you hit a PR, but it's never good enough. Yeah. It always has to be more.
Oh, man. I was always chasing that 800-pound deadlift. Yeah. And I never got there. And I got up to, like, in the gym, I got up to like 750 in the gym. Yeah. But I was always chasing that 800, and I could never get there. That was like my white whale. Yeah.
But for me, it was a over 4 bench press. Yeah. And I hit it, and I wasn't like ecstatically happy.
Yeah, because you want more.
Okay, now let's make it 415. Now let's make it 420.
Yeah. Yeah.
Same as the deadlift. My deadlift's okay, but I made a goal when I met Lewis, 700 pounds. We're a long ways from that. But he looked at me and said, you can do it. It's going to take a long time. Yeah. But you can do it.
It took a long time for me to get to that.
It's like with the squat. Hitting over a 500-pound squat's cool. But let's hit over a 6. Let's hit over a 7. Yeah. Let's keep going until you can't do it anymore. Yeah. Yeah. It's
a lot of work.
I made a goal. I'm done when I'm 40. I got 8 years. Okay. So I'm done heavy competing when I'm 40. I'll still lift. But unless something happens. But
we'll keep you going.
Yeah. All right, man. I think that's all I got. You got anything else to add to anyone?
No. I appreciate you having me on. It was, the time just flies.
Yeah.
There's so many more stories. I mean, all the people that really influenced me over the years. There's so many gyms, so many people, so many coaches, and just another chapter.
Yeah.
You know?
We're going to have you on again. We'll get that Wisconsin or Adams Friendship, Wisconsin Rapids story.
Oh,
we
there's
talked about.
I mean, there's so many gyms, and like I said, so many people and so many great people.
I'm gonna just have you and Louie on here one day, just talking like that.
Just talking.
I won't even be on it. I'll just like wave in the background.
That'll be our Sunday morning show.
Yeah. Brett and Lou in the morning.
Lifting on the lakeshore.
Oh, that's a good one.
Lifting on the lakeshore. Yeah.
That's great. WMT, you listening? But all right, man.
All right.
Thanks. Appreciate it.
Thank you.